2 more weeks, then everything changes.
Lorado Mokina learned that some truths arrive in silence. The guest house door stood half open Thursday afternoon, laundry basket balanced on her hip, humming something from Johannesburg. Just another routine task in the quiet life she'd built caring for Mrs. Choi. Then she heard breathing. Wrong kind, urgent, deliberate. Every instinct screamed to walk away. Her feet moved closer instead. Through the gap, bodies pressed together, moving with the ease of practice. Not strangers, not new. His hand tangled in her hair, her designer blouse half undone, and voices, low, conspiratorial, dangerous. 2 more weeks, then everything changes. Laughter, cruel, victorious. The basket slipped from her hands. But that moment, that world-splitting moment, was still 3 weeks away. 3 weeks earlier, Lorado stepped off a plane into Busan's gray mist with 1 suitcase and a contract promising double her previous salary. She wasn't here for adventure, just stability, just survival. Mrs. Choi's hillside home overlooked Haeundae Beach, dark wood, paper screens, the lingering smell of funeral incense. Lorado was here to do a job, mind her business, and stay invisible. She had no idea that silence would become impossible. Welcome to K-Stories by Emma. Before we continue, please like, share, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss any story. Lorado's reflection fractured across the marble foyer, 1,000 versions of herself split between polished stone. She gripped her suitcase handle tighter, suddenly aware of how foreign she looked in this space, how out of place. Then Mrs. Choi appeared at the top of the stairs, smaller than Lorado expected, wrapped in black silk that made her seem like she was disappearing into shadows. But her eyes, sharp, calculating, missing absolutely nothing, locked onto Lorado with an intensity that made standing still feel like being examined under a microscope. "Come," Mrs. Choi said in accented English, not a request. The tea ceremony happened in a room overlooking the garden. Delicate cups, steam rising between them, and questions Lorado didn't expect. What do you miss most about home? Not, what are your qualifications? Not, can you handle the physical demands? Just, what do you miss? Lorado hesitated. The noise. Johannesburg is loud. Here feels quiet in a way that makes me nervous. Mrs. Choi nodded slowly. Quiet can hide many things. She poured more tea with hands that trembled slightly. Do you believe people can love again after loss? The shift was dizzying, professional to deeply personal in seconds. Lorado thought about her grandmother, the way she'd held on to life until Lorado came home from university, as if she'd been waiting for permission to let go. I think people can, but they need someone who shows up because they want to, not because they have to. Mrs. Choi's expression did something complicated, soft and hard at once. My sons visit out of duty, she said quietly. I need someone who comes because they choose to. And Lorado understood then, this wasn't a job interview, this was a test of something else entirely. She told Mrs. Choi about her grandmother's final months, how she'd stopped trying to fix everything and just sat with her, held her hand, let silence be enough when words failed. Mrs. Choi studied her for a long moment. Then, "You'll do." Later, unpacking in her modest room overlooking the garden, Lorado heard them. Voices, male, angry, rapid Korean sharp enough to cut through walls and language barriers. 2 men, arguing about something that made the air feel dangerous. A soft knock made her turn. Mrs. Choi stood in the doorway, expression unreadable. My sons, they fight about everything except what matters. She paused and something flickered in her eyes. Warning, maybe, or preparation. The younger one, June, he'll be polite to you. Too polite. Don't let that fool you into thinking he's happy. Before Lorado could ask what that meant, Mrs. Choi disappeared. That night, unable to sleep, Lorado wandered to the kitchen for water. That's when she saw him through the window. A man standing alone in the rain-soaked garden, expensive coat, phone pressed to his ear, and shoulders carrying weight so visible she could almost feel it from here. June. Even from this distance, even in darkness, Lorato could see it. The way he held himself like he was barely keeping something contained, like one wrong word might make him shatter. He turned slightly and streetlight caught his face. Beautiful, devastated, completely alone. And Lorato thought, what kind of prison makes a man stand in the rain rather than come inside his own home? Morning light filtered through rice paper screens, turning everything soft and golden. Lorato knelt beside Mrs. Choi on the therapy mat, their breathing synchronized as she guided the older woman's arm through gentle rotations. Slow, Lorato murmured. Let the muscle remember before you push it. Mrs. Choi's exhale was steady, controlled. 3 weeks in, and they'd found their rhythm, the kind of companionship that didn't require constant conversation. Then the front door opened. Not loud, deliberate quietness. Someone trying not to disturb. Someone who'd perfected the art of entering spaces without claiming them. Lorato felt Mrs. Choi tense beneath her hands. Footsteps crossed the foyer, hesitated, then continued toward the sitting room where they worked. He appeared in the doorway like an apology made flesh. June, tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than Lorato made in 3 months. Hair precisely styled, face carefully neutral, the kind of expression that took practice to maintain. Everything about him screamed expensive and controlled, and barely holding together. His eyes found his mother first. He spoke in Korean, soft, respectful, the vowels rolling in ways Lorato was just beginning to recognize. Mrs. Choi responded briefly. Her tone carried something Lorato couldn't translate but understood anyway. Concern wrapped in disappointment, wrapped in love that didn't know how to help. Then June switched to English, his gaze landing somewhere near Lorato's shoulder, not quite meeting her eyes. Thank you for taking care of her. The words were correct, polite, empty. Lorato nodded, keeping her hands steady on Mrs. Choi's arm. Of course. Silence stretched. June stood there like he'd forgotten why he came, like he was running calculations in his head. How long was appropriate to stay, what was expected, when could he leave without seeming cruel? 12 minutes. He lasted exactly 12 minutes before checking his watch and manufacturing urgency. I have a meeting. I should go, Mrs. Choi said quietly in English. Not cold, just tired. He left the same way he arrived, quiet, careful, like a ghost who'd forgotten he used to be solid. The door closed. The house settled back into silence. Mrs. Choi stared at the empty doorway, and when she finally spoke, her voice carried weight that had nothing to do with age. He wasn't always like this, closed off. She paused, choosing her next words carefully. She did that to him. Lorato didn't ask who she was. Not yet, but the sadness in Mrs. Choi's voice made her want to, made her chest tighten with something uncomfortably close to protective anger for a man she barely knew. The days found their pattern after that. Mornings, stretches, breathing exercises, gentle walks around the garden when Mrs. Choi's energy allowed. Afternoons, trips to Gamchin Culture Village, the hillside neighborhood painted in colors that made Mrs. Choi smile despite herself. Art installations, tiny cafes, steep stairs that forced them to move slow and talk slower. Evenings, Lorato cooked fusion meals that made Mrs. Choi laugh. Bulgogi seasoned with peri-peri spice, kimchi meets chakalaka, flavors that shouldn't work but somehow did. Your grandmother taught you this? Mrs. Choi asked one night, eyes bright with amusement. To make things work that shouldn't? Yes. And through it all, June appeared. Every few days, always polite, always distant, carrying takeout containers he set on the counter and never stayed to eat, speaking in that careful, measured tone that made Lorato think of men treading water in the deep end, exhausted but refusing to admit it. Then one Thursday evening, Lorato noticed something. June stood in the kitchen doorway holding containers from some expensive place in Somyeon, talking about nothing, weather, business, traffic, and there, just visible beneath his precisely styled hair, along the left side of his jaw, a bruise. Faint, yellowing, days old but still there. Someone had tried to cover it with concealer, blending carefully, but the light caught it wrong and gave the secret away. Lorado's eyes flicked up, found Mrs. Choi already staring at the same spot. Their gazes met across the kitchen. Neither woman said anything, but the air in the room changed, thickened, became something else entirely. June didn't notice, or pretended not to. He left the takeout, cited another meeting, disappeared into the night. That evening, after dinner, Mrs. Choi retrieved something from her bedroom. A photo in a silver frame. 5 years old, maybe 6. Colors still vibrant, but the moment already feeling like history. June, younger, laughing with his whole face, the kind of joy that people can't fake. His arm around a woman with porcelain skin, delicate features, and a smile that stopped at her lips, never reached her eyes, never even tried. Hye-rin, Mrs. Choi said simply, setting the frame on the table between them, like evidence in a trial that hadn't happened yet. She looked at Lorado, and her expression was complicated, angry and sad and something else, determination maybe, or preparation for war. "She's still here," Mrs. Choi said quietly. "That's the problem." The black luxury sedan announced itself before it appeared, bass thumping through closed windows, the kind of music meant to be heard 3 blocks away. Lorato looked up from chopping vegetables, watching through the kitchen window as the car pulled into the driveway with unnecessary speed. A man unfolded himself from the driver's seat. Stocky build, expensive watch catching afternoon sunlight like a signal flare, designer clothes that fit too perfectly to be accidental, and white orchids, massive, pristine, carried like a peace offering for sins not yet confessed. This had to be Junso. He moved toward the house with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no, never had to question whether he belonged. The front door opened without knocking. "Mother!" His voice filled the house instantly, loud, warm, performed. "I brought your favorites." Lorado dried her hands, stepping into the hallway just as Junso swept Mrs. Choi into a theatrical embrace, all affection and grand gestures. But his eyes were already cataloging the room, the furniture, the artwork, landing on Lorado with calculating interest that made her skin prickle. "You're the new caregiver." He switched to English smoothly, his smile widening. "You're—" a deliberate pause. "Not what I expected." The gap before caregiver felt intentional, like he'd considered other words first. Lorado kept her expression neutral. "Lorado Mokuena." Junso, the older son. He said it like a title that should mean something. "Are you married?" The question landed too casual, too familiar. "No." "Do you like Busan? I imagine it's quite different from— Where are you from again?" "Johannesburg." "Ah." His gaze traveled over her slowly, not subtle, not respectful, just assessing. "Does my mother talk about me? I hope she's been kind." Before Lorado could answer, Mrs. Choi spoke sharply in Korean. Junso laughed, easy, unbothered, and responded in the same language. But Lorado caught the shift in his tone, something harder beneath the charm. Mrs. Choi accepted the orchids without smiling, set them on the side table without looking at them. Junseo didn't seem to notice, or didn't care. He was already moving through the house like he owned it, touching things, picking up family photos, commenting on changes since his last visit. He disappeared into his father's study for 20 minutes. When he emerged, he carried 3 bottles from the late Mr. Choi's collection. Dark glass, expensive labels, the kind of thing you don't just take without asking. "For safekeeping," Junseo announced cheerfully, kissing his mother's cheek. "You know how valuable these are. I'll make sure they're properly stored." Mrs. Choi said nothing, but her jaw tightened, a muscle jumping beneath papery skin. Junseo left the same way he arrived, loud, confident, taking up space even in his absence. The door closed. The house breathed. Mrs. Choi stared at the orchids like they'd personally offended her. "My husband knew," she said quietly, still in English. Her voice carried something cold and final. Before he passed, he knew Juncio couldn't be trusted with anything that mattered. Over the next week, Lerato started noticing patterns. Juncio visited every 3 days, always when June wasn't around, always leaving with something. Tuesday, paperwork from the study, folders thick with documents Lerato couldn't read. Thursday, a jade figurine from the mantel, small enough to pocket, valuable enough to matter. Saturday, keys, multiple sets, properties maybe, offices, things that granted access. Mrs. Choi allowed it wordlessly, never protested, never stopped him, but each time Juncio left, her expression went somewhere distant and angry. "Why do you let him take those things?" Lerato asked after the keys disappeared. Mrs. Choi's smile was bitter. "Because taking is what he knows, and I'd rather know what he steals than wonder what he's planning." Late that night, Lerato woke to use the bathroom and noticed light beneath the study door. She found Mrs. Choi sitting in darkness except for a single desk lamp. Her husband's reading glasses rested in her palm, old-fashioned, gold-rimmed, still holding the shape of a face that would never wear them again. "Mrs. Choi?" The older woman didn't startle, just looked up with eyes that had stopped crying weeks ago but still carried the weight of unshed tears. "My husband changed his will 2 months before the accident." Her voice was steady, factual, like she was reading a grocery list instead of revealing family secrets. "Juncio doesn't know yet. No one does except the lawyer." She paused. "And now you." Lerato's heart kicked. "I don't understand why you're telling me this." Mrs. Choi set the glasses down carefully, precisely, like they were evidence that needed preserving. "Because when the storm comes, and it will come, I need someone in this house who sees clearly." Her eyes locked onto Lerato's, steel wrapped in silk. "My sons can't. They're too close, too damaged, too invested in their own survival." She stood slowly, joints protesting, but her spine remained straight. "But maybe you can." The doorbell chimed like a warning. Lerato was folding laundry in the sitting room when the sound cut through the afternoon quiet. Mrs. Choi looked up from her book and something flickered across her face. Recognition followed immediately by resignation. "I'll get it," Lerato said, already moving toward the foyer. She opened the door to perfection wrapped in cruelty. Hai-Ren stood on the threshold like she was posing for a magazine cover. Porcelain skin without a single visible pore, designer handbag that probably cost more than Lerato's yearly salary. Hair styled in effortless waves that required significant effort, and a smile, bright, practiced, sharp as broken glass. "Hello!" Her voice was sugar over ice. "You must be the caregiver. I brought soup for dear Mrs. Choi." She held out a container like it was a gift instead of an obligation. Lerato accepted it, stepping aside to let her enter. Hai-Ren moved through the house like she owned it, not confident, territorial, claiming space with every step. She found Mrs. Choi in the sitting room and immediately switched to Korean, her tone shifting to something that sounded affectionate but felt performative, cooing, theatrical, all surface warmth with nothing beneath. Mrs. Choi responded politely, nothing more. Hai-Ren settled onto the sofa without being invited, crossing her legs with careful precision. Then she switched back to English, her attention landing on Lerato like a spotlight designed to expose flaws. "So how long do you plan to stay in Busan?" Not, "How are you settling in?" Not, "Do you need anything?" Just, "How long until you leave?" "As long as Mrs. Choi needs me," Lerato said evenly. Hai-Ren's smile didn't waver. "These positions are usually temporary. People come, people go. It's the nature of caregiving, isn't it?" The pause before temporary felt like a threat wrapped in concern. She stood abruptly, rearranging the cushions on the sofa without asking, moving the orchids Junso had brought to a different table, adjusting the curtains to let in more light. "Is the tea always served this cool?" she asked, lifting Mrs. Choi's cup and frowning. "June says his mother prefers it warmer." Lorado's jaw tightened. Mrs. Choi preferred it exactly this temperature. They'd established that weeks ago. Hyrin continued without waiting for a response. He's been so exhausted lately, so stressed. She sighed dramatically, as if June's exhaustion was happening to her. I keep telling him he needs to manage things better, but you know how he is. She looked at Mrs. Choi expectantly, like the old woman was supposed to apologize, like she was responsible for fixing her grown son's problems. Mrs. Choi's face did something Lorado had never seen before. It blanked completely. Years of practice turning emotion invisible, becoming stone wrapped in skin. I'm sure you support him as best you can, Mrs. Choi said quietly in English. The words were polite. The tone was dismissal. Hyrin stayed another 15 minutes, long enough to make her presence uncomfortable, short enough to pretend she cared about Mrs. Choi's rest. When she finally left, air-kissing Mrs. Choi's cheeks, barely acknowledging Lorado, the soup remained on the counter, untouched, growing cold. Mrs. Choi stared at the closed door for a long moment. She thinks I'm too old to matter, she said quietly, steel beneath silk. She's wrong. June arrived an hour later. His eyes were shadowed, darker than usual, like he hadn't slept properly in days, maybe weeks. I'm sorry, he said immediately, the words tumbling out before he'd fully entered the sitting room. Hyrin told me she stopped by. I didn't know she was planning. I should have warned you. He was apologizing for his girlfriend's existence, for her presence in his mother's home, for taking up space. Mrs. Choi waved a dismissive hand. She brought soup. She means well, June said, but the words sounded hollow, rehearsed, something he'd told himself so many times he'd stopped questioning whether it was true. He stayed longer than usual that evening, helped Mrs. Choi with her medication, checking each pill carefully, asking about side effects, adjusting the schedule based on what she told him. His hands were gentle, his attention complete. For a moment, Lorado saw it, the man he used to be, attentive, present, unburdened by whatever weight was currently crushing him. Then his phone started buzzing, once, twice, 3 times in rapid succession. June pulled it from his pocket and Lorado caught a glimpse of the screen before he could turn it away. 12 missed calls, all from Hyrin, each notification progressively more demanding, the preview texts visible even from across the room. Where are you? Why aren't you answering? We need to talk now. June's hand trembled slightly as he silenced it. I should go. His voice was tight, controlled. She worries. He left quickly, almost running, like staying another minute might cost him something he couldn't afford to lose. The door closed. The house settled back into quiet. Mrs. Choi stared at the space where her son had been standing, and when she spoke, her voice carried something that made Lorado's chest tighten. Love shouldn't feel like drowning, but he's forgotten what breathing feels like. Thursday afternoons meant laundry. Sheets from the guest house, towels from the main bath, the routine Lorado had followed for weeks without incident. She balanced the wicker basket on her hip, humming something her mother used to sing while hanging washing on the line back in Johannesburg. Melody without words, just comfort wrapped in memory. The guest house sat at the edge of the property, separated from the main residence by a garden path lined with stones. Quiet, private, usually empty. Except today, the door stood half open. Lorado slowed. Something felt wrong. The air carried tension she couldn't name yet. Then she heard voices, low, urgent, definitely not alone. Every instinct screamed to turn around, walk away, mind the business she was paid to mind. Her feet moved closer instead. Through the gap in the door, she saw them. Hyrin, pressed against the sofa, designer blouse half unbuttoned, hair falling from its perfect style. Jun Seo, his hand tangled in those loosened strands, the other gripping her waist with possession that spoke of practice, of familiarity, of months, maybe years doing exactly this. Their bodies moved together with choreographed ease, no hesitation, no discovery, just routine betrayal. But it was their words that turned Lorado's blood to ice. 2 more weeks until the will reading. Jun Seo's voice was rough but clear. Then everything shifts. Hyrin laughed, low, cruel, victorious. Your brother won't know what happened. He's too busy trying to make me happy to see anything. The fool actually thinks I care. Jun Seo pulled back slightly, grinning. All those gifts, all that begging, and I get his girlfriend and inheritance. Their laughter tangled together, shared, intimate, the sound of people who'd stopped pretending to have souls. Lorado's hands went numb. The basket slipped from her grip, laundry tumbling silently onto grass. She backed away from that door, from that truth, heart thundering so loud she was sure they'd hear it. They didn't, too focused on each other, too confident in their secrecy. Lorado turned and ran. She made it to her room before her knees gave out, collapsed onto the bed, staring at the ceiling, mind racing through impossible calculations. Tell someone? Who? June, who apologized for his girlfriend's cruelty and called it concern? June, who trembled when she called too many times and said, she worries. June, who was so desperate not to lose her that he'd never believe she was already gone. Or Mrs. Choi, whose heart was still healing from her husband's loss, who'd already buried one man. Could she survive knowing both her sons were disasters in different ways? 3 hours passed. The sun moved across the sky, light shifting through her window, and Lorado stayed frozen, replaying every word, every laugh, every casual mention of destroying a man who'd done nothing except love the wrong person. They weren't just cheating, they were plotting. Jun So wanted the inheritance he'd been cut from. Hyrin wanted security that didn't require actual affection, and June was the obstacle they were planning to remove, not with violence, but with something worse: humiliation, heartbreak, the kind of destruction that happened slowly, publicly, while everyone watched. A soft knock interrupted the spiral. Mrs. Choi entered without waiting for permission, her eyes sharp despite the late hour. She took one look at Lorado's face and knew. You saw something today. Not a question, a statement. I can tell. Lorado's throat closed, words stuck somewhere between truth and protection. Mrs. Choi crossed the room slowly, sitting beside her on the bed with deliberate care. Her hand found Lorado's, squeezing once. Whatever it is, lying to protect me won't work. Her voice was steel, wrapped in kindness. I'm stronger than I look, and I've survived worse than secrets. Lorado's voice cracked when she finally spoke. It's about June. The words scraped her throat raw. And I don't think telling him will save him. She looked at Mrs. Choi, eyes burning. I think it might destroy him first. Lorado didn't sleep. She watched dawn break over Haeundae Beach from her window, the sky shifting from black to deep purple to bruised orange. The ocean moved with indifferent rhythm, waves continuing whether she told the truth or buried it. Her mind ran calculations she'd learned from survival. Speak and lose everything: job, visa, stability, the remittances her family depended on. Stay silent and become complicit in destroying a man who'd done nothing except trust the wrong people. Neither option felt survivable. The numbers didn't add up. They never did when morality collided with necessity. Morning brought routine whether she was ready or not. Mrs. Choi's exercises, gentle stretches, controlled breathing, breakfast, rice, soup, banchan arranged carefully, medication distributed in the small plastic organizer, each compartment checked twice. Lorado moved through it like a stranger occupying her own skin, present but distant, functional but fractured. Mrs. Choi watched her carefully, said nothing, just watched. Then June arrived, unexpected, mid-morning, carrying a white bakery box tied with ribbon. Hyrin sent these. He set the box on the counter, almost apologetic. Pastries from that place in Gwangali. She wanted to apologize for being short the other day. Lorado stared at the box like it contained evidence instead of baked goods. June opened it, revealing perfect pastries, croissants, tarts, delicate things that probably cost more than they should. His face did something complicated when he looked at them. Gratitude mixed with relief, mixed with desperate hope that this gesture meant something real. She's trying, he said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. I know she can be difficult, but she's trying. Lorado's hands clenched beneath the counter. She wanted to scream, wanted to grab those perfect pastries and throw them against the wall, wanted to shake him until he saw what she'd seen, the cruelty, the conspiracy, the calculated destruction happening right in front of him. Instead, she said nothing. Mrs. Choi accepted a pastry with polite gratitude that didn't reach her eyes. June stayed 15 minutes, talked about weather and work and nothing that mattered. Left the box behind like proof that love could be packaged and delivered. The door closed. Lorado exhaled for what felt like the first time in hours. Mrs. Choi set her untouched pastry down carefully, precisely, like she was placing pieces on a chessboard. "You're going to tell him, aren't you?" Not a question, a statement of inevitable fact. Lorato nodded, throat too tight for words. "I have to," her voice came out rough. "Even if he hates me for it, even if I lose this job and get sent back to Johannesburg with nothing." She looked at Mrs. Choi, eyes burning. "I can't watch him give everything, his love, his inheritance, his whole life to people who are actively stealing from him." Mrs. Choi's expression shifted. Not surprise, recognition, like she'd been waiting for this moment since the day Lorato arrived. "My husband would have liked you." She reached across the table, squeezing Lorato's hand with surprising strength. "He always said the truth costs more than people think, but silence costs more." Her eyes were steel. "When you tell him, I'll be there. He's less likely to burn the world down if I'm watching." That afternoon, Lorato found June in the garden, alone, phone dark for once, lying face down on the bench beside him. He stared at the ocean like it held answers he couldn't find anywhere else. Lorato stood at the glass door for a long moment, watching him, gathering courage that kept threatening to abandon her. Then she walked outside before fear could win. Her footsteps on the stone path made him turn slightly, not startled, just aware. She stopped a few feet away, maintaining careful distance. "I need to talk to you," her voice was steadier than she felt, "about Hyren and your brother and what I saw 3 days ago." The words hung in the air between them, heavy, impossible to take back. June turned slowly. His expression was unreadable, carefully blank in that way she'd learned meant he was bracing for impact. "What did you see?" The question came out careful, almost fearful, like part of him already knew the answer, but had been too terrified to ask, like he'd been waiting for someone brave enough or stupid enough to confirm what he'd been pretending not to notice. His hands trembled slightly, just visible, just enough. And Lorato realized he already suspected, maybe not the details, maybe not the full scope of the betrayal, but somewhere deep down, beneath the desperate gratitude and the exhausting performance of keeping someone happy, he knew. He just needed someone else to say it out loud, so he could stop lying to himself. "They're sleeping together." 3 words, simple, devastating, final. The garden seemed to hold its breath. Even the ocean went quiet, waves pausing mid-crash, as if the world itself was waiting to see what happened next. June's face didn't change immediately. It was like watching ice crack in slow motion, fractures spreading beneath the surface before everything shattered. Then the explosion came. But it wasn't loud, it was surgical. His voice dropped to something cold and precise, each word a scalpel designed to cut truth from lies. "How long have you known?" 3 days. "What exactly did you see?" Lorato forced herself to hold his gaze. The guest house, Thursday afternoon, Hyren and Junso, together. Not just, she swallowed, they were talking about the will reading, about you being too distracted to notice, about taking everything. "That's convenient," his tone was ice. "A caregiver I've known for weeks suddenly has information that destroys my relationship and implicates my brother in fraud. Why should I believe you?" "Because I have nothing to gain from lying." Lorato's voice stayed steady even as her heart hammered. "No inheritance to chase, no rivalry. I'm risking my job, my visa, everything I've built here just to tell you this." June's hands were shaking, visible tremors he couldn't control. "You're lying. You have to be lying because if you're not—" He stopped, couldn't finish, because finishing that sentence meant accepting a truth he'd been running from for months. "Get out," his voice broke on the words, cracked down the middle like glass under pressure. "I don't know what you're trying to accomplish, but I want you out of this house by morning." Lorado's heart dropped. She'd known this was possible, had calculated the cost, but hearing it still felt like drowning. Before she could respond, Mrs. Choi's voice cut through from the doorway. "She stays." 2 words, absolute, non-negotiable. June spun toward his mother. "You can't be serious. She just—" "And you listen." Mrs. Choi moved into the garden slowly, each step deliberate, small but immovable. "Lorado has no reason to lie, no inheritance to chase, no rivalry to fuel, nothing to gain except unemployment and deportation." She stopped in front of her son, looking up at him with eyes that had watched empires rise and fall within family walls. "She's risking everything to tell you this." Her voice was steel. "The question isn't whether you believe her, it's whether you're brave enough to find out if she's right." Silence stretched, painful, thick enough to choke on. Then June's facade finally cracked completely. He sank onto the garden bench, head in his hands, shoulders curling inward like he was trying to make himself smaller, disappear entirely. "I knew something was wrong." His voice came out fractured, broken. I kept thinking if I tried harder, if I was better, if I bought the right things, said the right words, became whatever she needed." He stopped, breath hitching. "I've been trying so hard not to lose her that I never asked if she was already gone." The confession hung in the air, raw, honest, the kind of truth that only comes when defenses have been completely demolished. Mrs. Choi knelt in front of him, joints protesting, but love making her strong. She cupped his face with both hands, forcing him to look at her. "Then we get proof." Her voice was gentle but firm. "Not for revenge, for clarity. So you can decide what kind of man you want to be with full knowledge of who they really are." She glanced at Lorado, still standing awkwardly near the path, ready to run if necessary. "We'll need your help." Mrs. Choi's expression was complicated, gratitude mixed with determination, mixed with something that looked like war strategy. "Are you willing?" Midnight found them gathered in the kitchen, 3 people planning something that felt dangerously close to war. Mrs. Choi spread a hand-drawn map across the table, the estate in careful detail, exit points, blind spots, sight lines from every window, the guest house marked with a red circle like a target. "My husband taught me to plan for war before it arrives." Her finger traced paths across paper. "We start tomorrow." Lorado stared at the map, then at the elderly woman who'd drawn it with architectural precision. "You've done this before." "Not this exactly." Mrs. Choi's smile was thin. "But I've survived 50 years in a family where power is currency. You learn to prepare." June said nothing, just stared at the red circle like it might catch fire. The next 3 days became a careful operation. Lorado adjusted her routine, timing laundry and garden work to coincide with Junso's usual visits, passing the guest house naturally, observing without being obvious. Mrs. Choi moved with unexpected stealth for a woman who needed help with stairs. She retrieved something from her husband's study, a small recording device, no bigger than a coin. "A gift from my husband's associate in Ohio," she explained, turning it over in her palm. "He believed in insurance." She placed it behind the antique clock on the guest house mantel during an afternoon when Junso was in Seoul and Hae-rin was getting her nails done in Seolmyeon. Careful, precise. Then returned to the main house like nothing had happened. June continued his normal schedule: work, meetings, appearing at the house with takeout and forced smiles, answering Hae-rin's calls with patience that looked painful. He was barely holding himself together. Lorado could see it in the way his hands shook when he thought no one was watching, the way he'd forget what he was saying mid-sentence, the way he looked at his phone like it was a weapon pointed at his chest. Late one evening, Lorado found him in the library, sitting in darkness except for ambient light from the garden, an untouched glass of whiskey on the side table. just sitting, staring at nothing. She almost left, give him privacy, give him space to fracture without witnesses, but something made her stay. She sat in the chair across from him, maintaining careful distance, saying nothing, just present. Minutes passed, maybe 10, maybe 20. Finally, June spoke. His voice came out raw, scraped clean of the careful polish he usually maintained. I kept trying to be enough. He didn't look at her, just kept staring into darkness. Better suits, better gifts, better words, better everything. His laugh was bitter. And none of it mattered, because the problem was never me, was it? Lorado's chest tightened. No, the problem was never you. Then what was it? Some people take because that's what they do. She chose her words carefully. It's not about deserving or earning. It's not about being enough. It's about who they are at their core. June's eyes finally met hers, red-rimmed, exhausted, but something shifted there. Recognition, maybe, or the beginning of understanding that his worth wasn't measured by someone else's capacity for cruelty. She was never going to love you the way you deserved, Lorado said quietly, because she's not capable of it. He held her gaze for a long moment, then nodded once, barely perceptible, but enough. The recording device captured everything 2 days later. Hyrin and June So in the guest house, their voices clear, explicit, damning. That night, the three of them listened to the recording in Mrs. Choi's sitting room. Silence stretched after it ended, heavy, final. June's jaw was tight enough to shatter, his hands clenched into fists. I want to confront them, now, tonight. Mrs. Choi shook her head slowly. No. They're planning to destroy me, to steal. And they will fail, her voice was steel. But only if we're smart. We wait for the will reading. Let them believe they've won. Let them get comfortable. Her smile was cold. Then we take everything. The week before the will reading stretched like pulled wire, every moment vibrating with tension no one acknowledged out loud. Hyrin visited twice, both times performing affection with practiced ease that would have been impressive if it wasn't so calculated. Bringing June's favorite coffee, touching his arm with careful tenderness, laughing at things that weren't funny, playing the role of devoted girlfriend while planning his destruction behind scenes she thought were hidden. Lirata watched it happen and wanted to vomit. Jansio called daily, always asking about mother's health in tones dripping with false concern, never actually visiting, just checking in, making sure the pieces were still in place for whatever move he planned to make after the reading. Mrs. Choi answered his calls with polite brevity. Yes, she was fine. No, she didn't need anything. Yes, she'd see him soon. Then she'd hang up and her expression would go somewhere cold. June maintained his routine with eerie precision. Work, meetings, visits to the house, answering Hyrin's calls, smiling when required, speaking when expected. But the mask was slipping. Lirado noticed things others might miss. He forgot to eat unless someone reminded him, stood too long in the shower, water running until it went cold, stared at his phone like it was a weapon he couldn't put down but was too afraid to use. One evening she found him in the garden again, sitting on wet grass, rain soaking through his expensive shirt, turning fabric dark and heavy. He wasn't checking his phone, wasn't doing anything, just sitting there while the sky emptied itself overhead. Lirado grabbed a towel from the bathroom and walked outside without overthinking it. She draped the towel over his shoulders and sat beside him on the wet grass. Rain immediately soaked through her clothes too. Cold, uncomfortable, but somehow necessary. They didn't speak for a long time, just sat there, two people in the rain, waiting for something neither could name. Finally, June's voice cut through the sound of falling water. I thought love was supposed to be the hardest thing I'd ever fight for. He stared at his hands. I didn't realize I was fighting alone the entire time. Lirado's throat tightened. She wanted to say something profound, something that would fix the broken pieces. But profound wasn't what he needed. You're not alone anymore. Simple, true. The words hung between them, carrying weight neither had expected. June turned to look at her, really look at her for the first time in days. His eyes were exhausted, red-rimmed, but something else lived there too. Gratitude, maybe. or recognition that being seen in the wreckage was better than drowning in it alone. Inside, Mrs. Choi watched from the sitting room window. A small smile touched her lips. Not happiness exactly, more like recognition. She'd seen something shifting between them over these strange, tense weeks. Not romance yet, but the foundation it could be built on. Trust, recognition, the willingness to sit in the rain with someone because leaving them alone felt wrong. She'd seen it before, with her husband, before the family business complicated everything, before power and inheritance turned love into strategy. Maybe June could have what his father had, before it all went wrong. Maybe. Irene called that night. June's phone lit up on the kitchen counter where he'd left it, her name glowing, demanding attention even in absence. He stared at it for 3 rings before answering, put it on speaker because he didn't trust himself to hold it steady. Baby, her voice was sugary, performed. I've been thinking, after the will reading, let's do something special, just you and me. We'll finally have time together. No distractions, no work, just us. June's grip on the counter turned white-knuckled. Loretta watched his jaw tighten, every muscle tensing against words he wanted to say but couldn't. Not yet. I'm looking forward to it, he lied smoothly, the performance matching hers perfectly. They talked for 5 more minutes, meaningless conversation about nothing. Then she hung up, satisfied that her distraction was still properly distracted. June set the phone down carefully, precisely, like it might explode if handled wrong. He looked at Loretta and his mother, both women watching him with expressions that said they understood exactly how hard that conversation had been. I need you both there. His voice was quiet but firm. At the reading, I don't trust myself to stay calm without witnesses. Mrs. Choi nodded once. We'll be there, all of us, together. The lawyer's office in Haeundae overlooked the harbor, all glass and steel, designed to make people feel small against the vastness of ocean and money and power consolidated in documents. Jun So arrived first, expensive suit barely containing his anticipation. He moved through the space like he already owned it, nodding at the receptionist, claiming the best seat at the conference table, confident, entitled, already spending inheritance he believed was rightfully his. 15 minutes later, June entered with Hai Ren on his arm. Her performance was flawless. Designer dress, perfect makeup, hand resting possessively on June's sleeve while she smiled at everyone with practiced warmth, playing devoted girlfriend so convincingly that anyone who didn't know better would have believed it completely. No one noticed Lorado in the corner beside Mrs. Choi, 2 women dismissed as irrelevant, the caregiver and the grieving widow, furniture with pulses, not worth acknowledging in a room where real power was about to change hands. Lorado preferred it that way. Invisible meant she could watch everything. The lawyer was elderly, gold-rimmed glasses, expensive suit that had been tailored decades ago and still fit perfectly. He opened the folder with methodical precision, each movement deliberate. We are here for the reading of Mr. Choi Dae-jung's last will and testament. Jun So leaned forward, eager, practically vibrating with anticipation. The lawyer began reading. Properties first, the estate in Haeundae, the apartment building in Somyeon, commercial real estate in Gwangali, each asset listed with clinical precision. All properties passed to Choi Jun with full discretion over distribution. Jun So's smile faltered, slightly, barely noticeable. Then business holdings, the import company, investment portfolios, offshore accounts established through connections in Ohio and beyond. All holdings passed to Choi Jun with full discretion over distribution. The smile disappeared completely. Jun So's face cycled through emotions like a broken slideshow, confusion, disbelief, growing rage barely contained beneath expensive fabric. There must be a mistake. His voice was tight, controlled. I'm the eldest son. The lawyer cut him off with paperwork. Physical documentation slid across the polished table like evidence in a trial. Your father was quite explicit in his reasoning. Years of reckless spending, questionable associations, failure to demonstrate responsibility in any capacity. He adjusted his glasses and read directly from the will. My eldest son has shown himself incapable of responsibility. I will not reward failure with inheritance. Everything passes to June, who may choose at his sole discretion whether to share any portion with his brother. The room went still, silent except for breathing and the distant sound of harbor traffic. Jun So's hands clenched into fists. His face went red, then white, then something dangerous. Hei Rin's mask fractured. Just for a second, her eyes darted to Jun So, panic, calculation, plans collapsing in real time. Then she pivoted with desperate smoothness, turning to June with manufactured sweetness. "Baby, this is incredible." Her hand found his arm, squeezed. "We can finally—" June raised his hand. Not aggressive, just stop. She fell silent immediately. The room waited. When June spoke, his voice was eerily calm, the kind of calm that came after storms had already destroyed everything. "I know about the guest house, each word precise, surgical. I know about the plan. I know everything." Hei Rin's face went blank. Jun So started to stand. June produced his phone, pressed play. 10 seconds of audio, just enough for everyone to hear voices, context, conspiracy. "You can leave with your dignity, or I can play the whole thing for everyone here. Choose quickly." Jun So lunged forward. June didn't flinch, didn't move, just stood there with the phone in his hand and truth as his only weapon. Mrs. Choi's voice cut through the tension. "Sit down, Jun So. You've embarrassed this family enough." He froze, then slowly backed towards the door. Hei Rin tried one last time, reaching for June's hand, eyes wide, voice breaking with performed emotion. "Please, let me explain. It's not what you—" June stepped back. The movement was small, simple, but it felt like a door closing forever. "I loved you enough to lose myself." His voice was steady now, clear. "Thank you for showing me what I was worth to you. Nothing." Jun So grabbed Hei Rin's arm and dragged her toward the exit. She protested, loud, desperate, her careful performance finally shattering into genuine panic. Their voices echoed down the hallway, then faded, then disappeared completely. The lawyer cleared his throat. "Well, that was, unprecedented." The drive home was silent. Mrs. Choi sat in the front passenger seat, hands folded in her lap like she was at church instead of returning from her eldest son's public humiliation. Lorado and June occupied the back seat, careful not to touch, despite the small space forcing proximity. Their bodies angled slightly away from each other. Not rejection, just caution. Too much had happened. Too much was still happening. The city passed in blurs of neon and rain, everything washed clean and impossible to recognize. Busan at night looked different after truth had been weaponized, sharper, less forgiving. No one spoke until they reached the estate. At home, June disappeared immediately, straight to his father's study, door closing with quiet finality that said he needed space to fall apart without witnesses. Lorado helped Mrs. Choi prepare tea, both women moving with careful quiet, muscle memory guiding hands through routine while minds processed what had just happened. Water boiled, leaves steeped, cups arranged on a tray that might go untouched. An hour passed, then 2. Mrs. Choi finally set down her own cup and looked toward the closed study door. "Go. He shouldn't be alone right now." Lorado hesitated. He wants to be alone because he thinks that's what strength looks like. Mrs. Choi's expression was knowing, sad. "Go, please." Lorado found him surrounded by paperwork. His father's documents spread across the desk like evidence of a life lived in careful planning. Business records, property deeds, investment portfolios. Old photographs showing younger versions of everyone. June as a boy, June Sale before entitlement hardened his features, their father before death made him untouchable. June sat in the leather chair, staring at nothing. He wasn't crying, but his eyes were raw, red-rimmed, the kind of exhaustion that came from holding everything together until you couldn't anymore. I keep thinking I should feel victorious. His voice was hollow. I won. They lost. Justice happened. He laughed bitterly. Instead, I just feel empty. Lorato sat in the chair across from him, maintaining distance but offering presence. That's grief, not for what you lost, but for what you thought you had. June looked at her, really looked, like he was seeing her clearly for the first time. How do you know that? Because I've lost things too, different things, but grief works the same way regardless of what it's mourning. They talked through the night. Not about the betrayal, not about Hyrin or Junso or the recording that had ended everything, just everything else. June asked about Johannesburg, about her family, about why she chose caregiving when she could have done anything else. Lorato answered honestly, talked about her grandmother, about learning that presence mattered more than fixing, about leaving home not because she wanted adventure, but because survival sometimes required distance. She asked about the business he never wanted, about inheriting responsibility he hadn't chosen, about what it felt like being the son who stayed while the other son took. June's expression did something complicated, multiple emotions fighting for space on one face, gratitude, fear, something that might have been hope if hope hadn't been beaten out of him over months of slow destruction. I'm not ready for... I know, Lorato interrupted gently. I'm not asking you to be. I'm just here if you need someone who sees you clearly. The space between them felt charged, electric with possibility and caution, and the awareness that whatever happened next mattered in ways neither could fully predict. But neither moved to close the distance. Not yet. Some things required time, healing, the space to remember what breathing felt like before attempting anything more complicated. So they sat there as dawn started breaking outside. Two people who'd survived the same storm, learning what it meant to exist in the aftermath together. 3 weeks passed, slowly at first, then faster. Time doing what it always did, moving forward whether people were ready or not. June started coming to the house differently, not out of duty, not with takeout containers and guilt and 12-minute visits timed for maximum efficiency. He came because the estate had become the only place where he didn't have to perform, where he could exist without calculating every word, every expression, every gesture for maximum palatability. He helped with Mrs. Choi's physical therapy, learning the stretches Lorato had been doing for months, asking questions about progression and limitations, and what his mother needed versus what she'd accept. He learned to cook Lorato's fusion recipes, burned the bulgogi the first time, added too much peri-peri spice the second, got it almost right by the third attempt, and the victory felt disproportionately meaningful. He laughed at jokes that weren't particularly funny, Mrs. Choi's dry observations about the neighbors, Lorato's stories about miscommunications with the grocery store Ajima who insisted on teaching her Korean through aggressive repetition. He was rebuilding something, not the man he'd been before Heirin, something else, something that felt more solid because it wasn't constructed around someone else's approval. One evening, Mrs. Choi announced she was tired, earlier than usual, suspiciously convenient timing. She retreated to her room with a knowing look that neither June nor Lorato acknowledged out loud. That left them alone in the kitchen. Dishes to wash, comfortable silence, the kind of quiet that didn't demand filling. They worked side by side at the sink, June washing, Lorato drying, their shoulders occasionally brushing, brief contact neither acknowledged, but neither pulled away from, just proximity, just existing in the same space without tension or calculation. I've been thinking, June said finally, hands deep in soapy water, focused intently on a plate that was already clean, about what comes next. Lorato waited, didn't push, just dried a bowl and gave him space to find whatever words he was searching for. The business, the properties, all of it. He rinsed the plate carefully, set it in the rack. I could rebuild everything exactly as it was, follow my father's blueprint, become the man everyone expected. He paused, glanced at Lorato. His expression was complicated, hopeful and scared in equal measure. Or I could build something different. Lorato's hand stilled on the dish towel. Different is terrifying. I know, June's voice was quiet, honest, but staying the same almost destroyed me. And I think he stopped, started again. I think I want different. He turned to face her fully, water dripping from his hands, close enough that Lorato could count his eyelashes if she wanted to. His hand found hers, still damp from dishwater, fingers threading together with careful intention, testing, asking permission without words. Would different include someone who's honest enough to risk everything for the truth? Lorato's breath caught, her heart doing something complicated against her ribs. Before she could answer, before she could figure out what answer even made sense, June continued quickly, almost nervous, like he was afraid courage might abandon him mid-sentence. I'm not proposing marriage or anything dramatic. I'm not, he laughed, self-deprecating. I'm barely figuring out who I am without her. He squeezed her hand gently. Would you consider having dinner with me? Not as my mother's caregiver, not as the woman who saved me, just as Lorato, with me as just June. The question hung in the air between them, simple, terrifying, full of implications neither was ready to name, but both felt hovering in the space where their hands connected. Lorato could say no, should say no probably, protect herself, maintain boundaries, keep this job safe and uncomplicated and professional. But looking at him, at June, who'd survived betrayal and was choosing vulnerability anyway, saying no felt impossible. She squeezed his hand once, gentle but firm. I'd like that. Her voice was steadier than she felt. Just dinner, just us. June's smile started small, then spread, genuine and entirely new, the kind of smile that belonged to a man learning what happiness felt like when it wasn't conditional. Just dinner, he repeated, like confirmation, like promise, like the beginning of something neither could predict, but both were willing to risk. Outside, through the kitchen window, Busan's lights reflected off dark water, the city continuing its endless rhythm, while inside, two people learned what it meant to choose each other without desperation, without performance, just honest choice and careful hope, and the willingness to build something different together. Saturday evening in Guangali. The waterfront restaurant was small, intimate, the kind of place locals knew about but tourists rarely found, filled with the smell of grilled fish and garlic, the sound of waves against the pier, conversations in Korean blending with the ocean's rhythm. June arrived first, nervous in a way that made him look younger, more vulnerable. He'd changed clothes 3 times before leaving his apartment, finally settling on something casual but intentional. Now he sat at the corner table, checking his phone repeatedly, wondering if she'd change her mind. Then Lorato appeared. Deep blue dress that caught light like water moving, her hair in natural curls that framed her face, gold hoops catching the restaurant's warm glow. She was beautiful, but more than that, she was present, fully herself without apology. June stood quickly, almost knocked over his water glass, caught it, smiled awkwardly. Hi. Hi. Dinner was awkward at first. They were navigating new territory without the safety of roles to hide behind. No caregiver and employer's son, no woman who'd exposed betrayal and man who'd survived it. Just 2 people trying to figure out what they were when everything else fell away. But gradually, the conversation found its rhythm. They talked about things that mattered. June's fear of becoming his father, inheriting not just the business but the coldness that came with protecting it. Lorato's loneliness in a country that still felt foreign despite months of trying to belong. The strange relief of being seen by someone without expectations attached. Halfway through the meal, June reached across the table. His fingertips brushed her wrist, light, tentative, testing whether she'd pull away. She didn't. I need you to know something. His voice was quiet, honest. I'm still figuring out who I am without her, without all of it. I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to have bad days. Lorato covered his hand with hers, squeezed gently. I'm not asking you to be perfect. Her eyes held his, steady, clear. I'm just asking you to be honest. Something in June's chest loosened. Relief mixed with gratitude, mixed with something he wasn't ready to name but felt anyway. After dinner, they walked along the beach. The air was cold, typical for late evening in Busan. City lights reflected off dark water, turning the ocean into liquid neon. June's hand found hers again. No pretense this time, just deliberate choice. And they walked in comfortable silence. They stopped where the pier met the sand. The moment stretched between them, taut, electric, full of possibility and fear and hope tangled together. June turned to face her fully. His hand came up slowly, cupping her cheek with devastating gentleness, giving her time to move away if she wanted. "Tell me if this isn't what you want." His thumb traced her jawline, soft, reverent, like she was something precious that might break under careless handling. Lorado's breath caught, her heart thundering. "Tell me to stop." Instead, she leaned into the touch, her eyes meeting his with clear permission, clear want. "Don't stop." He closed the distance slowly, giving her every opportunity to change her mind. When their lips finally met, it was soft, questioning, achingly careful. Lorado's hands found his chest, feeling his heartbeat thundering beneath expensive fabric, proof that he was just as affected, just as nervous, just as hopeful. The kiss deepened gradually, his fingers threading through her curls, her body pressing closer to his warmth, the world narrowing to just this, breath and touch, and the beginning of something neither had planned, but both recognized as real. They broke apart only when breathing became necessary, foreheads touching, both trembling slightly. "Come back with me," June whispered against her temple. "Not to, I just want more time with you. Just this, just us." Lorado nodded. They walked to his car with hands intertwined, the night stretching before them full of quiet promise, the space between them charged with anticipation and the careful vulnerability of two people choosing to trust again. The next morning, Lorado returned to Mrs. Choi's house as dawn broke over Hyundai. The old woman was already awake, tea steaming on the table, a knowing smile on her face that said she'd been expecting exactly this. "So," Mrs. Choi said simply, "how was dinner?" Lorado sat beside her, unable to stop smiling. It was a beginning. Mrs. Choi patted her hand, warm, approving. "Good, those are the best kind." Outside, the ocean continued its eternal rhythm, waves against shore, predictable and constant, and for the first time since arriving in Busan, Lorado felt like she was exactly where she belonged. The end. Thank you for joining K-Stories by Emma for this incredible journey. If you loved this story, please like, share, and subscribe. Your support means everything. Until next time, believe in love, fight for what matters, and never give up on redemption. This is Emma, signing off.